Putin's billion-dollar air defense network just collapsed. And I mean disastrously collapsed. Not in some forgotten border village, not on a faraway front line, directly above Moscow, directly above the capital he vowed would never experience war. On Christmas night, as Ukrainians sheltered beneath sirens, clinging to hope despite everything Putin unleashed against them, the Russian president received a very different kind of gift. 141 Ukrainian drones entered Russian airspace. They struck refineries, they struck factories, they struck ports, and his celebrated air defense system, it observed. That's not my conclusion. That's what the disorder at Moscow airports reveals. That's what the travelers sleeping across terminal floors reveal. That's what the fires glowing above Temriak port at 2 in the morning reveal. But here's where things become complicated. This was not merely a drone raid. This was a synchronized industrial chokehold campaign, and what I followed across the past 72 hours suggests we may be witnessing something far more consequential than another clash in this war. We may be watching the opening phase of Russia's strategic unraveling. Now, let me take you step by step through what unfolded, because the specifics matter here. Shortly before midnight on December 24th, Moscow time, residents across 14 Russian regions began hearing explosions. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin started issuing updates on Telegram. One drone intercepted at 11:35 p.m., then 4 more by 2 a.m., then 2 more, then another. He kept counting all night. But here's what he could not conceal. Every one of Moscow's 4 primary airports shut down. Sheremetyevo, Dominikovo, Zhukovsky, all of them, plus Kaluga roughly 100 miles southwest of the capital. Aviation authorities activated what they call the Carpet Emergency Protocol, normally reserved for imminent drone danger. More than 130 flights were canceled, delayed, or rerouted. Thousands of Russians who set out hoping to spend the holidays with relatives found themselves trapped in terminals, instructed to remain away from windows, listening to detonations outside. And this is the part that kept me awake last night researching. This was not the first time this month. On December 11th, the identical scenario unfolded. 400 flights canceled, 7 hours of airspace shut down over Moscow. The people sleeping on those terminal floors and the videos circulating online, they had already endured this nightmare 2 weeks earlier. They are reliving it repeatedly because Putin cannot halt these strikes. Wait, it gets worse. While Moscow's skies became a no-fly zone, Ukraine's actual objectives were burning. The Efremov synthetic rubber facility in Tula, roughly 180 kilometers from Moscow, was hit by at least 10 explosions, according to residents. This is not just any plant. This is Russia's only producer of high molecular and low molecular polyisobutylene compounds, with unique characteristics used in military vehicle tires, armored personnel carriers, and multiple rocket launcher systems. Without this plant, vital components for Russia's military manufacturing simply are not produced. At the same time, Ukraine's Air Force confirmed it struck the Novoshakhtinsk oil refinery in Rostov region using British-supplied Storm Shadow cruise missiles. Multiple detonations, enormous fire. This refinery, one of southern Russia's largest, directly supplies diesel and aviation fuel to Russian forces operating in Ukraine. Its storage capacity surpasses 210,000 cubic meters. The facility was already operating below capacity because of earlier Ukrainian drone attacks. Now, reports indicate it has been knocked completely out of operation. Here's what almost nobody is discussing. The port of Temriak on the Sea of Azov ignited overnight. 2 oil storage tanks caught fire. Flames spread across 2,000 square meters. 70 firefighters, 18 units of heavy equipment deployed. This port is not merely commercial infrastructure. It is a crucial transfer hub for Russian military fuel shipments, including supplies to occupied Crimea. When Temriak goes offline, pressure on the Kerch Bridge doubles. Supply lines for Russian troops become lethal bottlenecks. Now, what I'm about to show you changes the entire picture, because this pattern of attacks is not random. It is strategic precision, striking 3 pillars at once: Russia's air defense credibility, its energy infrastructure, and its military-industrial base. Ukraine has effectively identified the arteries sustaining Putin's war machine and is methodically severing them. The Kremlin claims it intercepted 141 drones that night. Perhaps it did, but shooting down drones is not the same as protecting your nation. Every interception creates debris. Every debris field triggers evacuations. Every airport closure strands thousands. Every factory blaze halts production. Putin's air defenses may be destroying drones, but Ukraine is dismantling Russia's sense of security in the process. And the psychological dimension here cannot be overstated. For nearly 3 years, Putin assured Russians the war would remain in Ukraine. He promised Moscow would never see conflict. That promise died on the cold marble floors of Novo Airport, where Russian citizens spent Christmas Eve wondering whether the next blast would be closer. This is the moment that brings everything into focus. Russia spent billions constructing layered air defense systems around Moscow. S-400s, S-300s, Panzer units placed on rooftops. These systems were designed to stop cruise missiles and high-altitude threats. They were never configured to confront swarms of inexpensive drones flying low and slow, their plastic frames barely appearing on radar. Ukraine did not defeat Russia's air defense with superior firepower. It defeated it with innovation, with adaptation, with the type of asymmetric warfare that renders costly military hardware obsolete. So where does this leave us? The strikes on December 24th and 25th were not merely tactical wins. They mark a strategic turning point. Ukraine has demonstrated it can penetrate deep into Russia, not occasionally, not randomly, but methodically, repeatedly, at will. And Russia cannot stop it. So I've shown you the fires, the airport paralysis, the factories burning, but that's only the visible damage. The real story is what is unfolding inside Russia's economy right now, because that is where this war will ultimately be decided. And then this happened. Russia's central bank raised interest rates to 21% in October. 21%. To put that into perspective, the U.S. Federal Reserve's current rate sits between 4 and 5%. Russia's rate is nearly 5 times higher. And here's what that signals. The Kremlin is watching inflation spiral beyond control and has exhausted conventional tools to contain it. By mid-December, Russian inflation reached 9.5% annually, more than double the central bank's 4% target. But standard monetary policy is failing because the source of inflation is not typical economic overheating, it is war expenditure. Putin has injected roughly 10 trillion rubles, about $100 billion, into military production this year alone. That cash floods the economy, inflates wages in the defense sector, creates labor shortages elsewhere, and pushes prices higher across the board. The central bank governor, Elvira Nebulina, understands she is trapped. She can raise rates to combat inflation, but that suffocates businesses dependent on credit. She can lower rates to encourage growth, but that allows inflation to explode. It is a dilemma of Putin's own creation, and there is no clean escape. But here's where it becomes complicated. The criticism is not coming from opposition figures. They are jailed or exiled. It is coming from Putin's inner circle. Sergei Chemezov, head of the Rostec defense conglomerate and one of Putin's closest allies, publicly labeled the 21% rate insanity. German Greff, CEO of state-controlled Sberbank, warned the economy cannot endure this indefinitely. These are not dissidents. These are the oligarchs who have benefited from Putin's system for decades. When they begin raising alarms, something fundamental has shifted. And the strain is not only financial, it is structural. Russia's labor market is facing severe shortages, with hundreds of thousands of men mobilized for war, killed, wounded, or having fled abroad. Factories cannot find workers. Wages are increasing not because productivity improved, but because companies are desperately bidding for a shrinking labor pool. That wage growth feeds straight back into inflation, forming a vicious cycle the central bank cannot break. Now, what I'm about to show you changes the entire picture. Russia's oil revenue, the backbone of its war financing, is under sustained attack. Analysis from the Center for Energy and Clean Air shows that in the second year of Western price caps, Russia lost roughly 9% of its Euros crude export revenue monthly. By late 2024, the effect of sanctions on monthly revenue had fallen 63% compared to January. Why? Because Russia constructed a shadow tanker fleet to bypass restrictions, but that fleet carries costs, literally. Here's the twist few people grasp. Russia is selling its oil to China and India at steep discounts. According to recent figures, China has saved approximately $20 billion on Russian oil purchases since 2022. Rosneft CEO Igor Sechin even acknowledged this at a Beijing energy forum, framing it as Chinese procurement efficiency. Think about what that implies. Russia's state oil company is openly admitting Moscow is subsidizing Beijing's economy while raising taxes on Russian citizens to finance the war. The figures are staggering. Combined Chinese and Indian savings from discounted Russian oil have cost Russian firms about $33 billion, roughly 2.6 trillion rubles at current exchange rates. That is 1.5 times Russia's entire annual higher education budget. It exceeds 4 to 5 years of spending for wealthy Russian regions. This is not trade, it is economic capitulation.
And the dependency goes deeper than oil pricing. Between 2022 and 2024, the share of Chinese products in Russia's total imports jumped from 23% to 57%. Russia has become increasingly dependent on Chinese goods across nearly every category: machinery, electronics, consumer items, industrial equipment. Meanwhile, Russia's significance as a supplier to China barely shifted at all. The relationship is fundamentally asymmetrical. Russia needs China far more than China needs Russia. Wait, it gets worse. Russia cannot restore the facilities Ukraine is destroying without Western technology. The Efremov rubber plant, the Novoshakhtinsk refinery, these sites were modernized using equipment from Siemens, Honeywell, and other Western manufacturers. Sanctions mean spare parts and software updates are unavailable. When these towers and reactors burn, Russia faces a choice: operate degraded infrastructure indefinitely, or plead with China for replacements at whatever price Beijing sets. This is the strategic trap Ukraine's strikes are exploiting. Every refinery fire does not merely cut present output, it causes long-term industrial damage Russia cannot fully repair. Every factory blast does not just halt today's production, it degrades Russia's ability to manufacture military equipment for years. Ukraine is systematically dismantling Russia's industrial base, while sanctions block reconstruction. The economic indicators confirm it. Russia's GDP growth is projected to slow sharply in 2025, from roughly 4% this year to under 1.5% next year, according to central bank forecasts. Some economists warn of stagflation, the dangerous mix of high inflation and stagnant growth that policymakers struggle to counter. The last major economy to endure sustained stagflation was the United States in the late 1970s. It took years of painful adjustment to escape. Here's what I find most striking. Putin has built a war economy that is consuming Russia's future. Military spending absorbs nearly 9% of GDP. Interest rates crush civilian businesses. Inflation erodes household savings. Brain drain accelerates as educated Russians leave. Industrial capacity degrades under attack. All of this to sustain a war showing no signs of ending in Russia's favor. Now, I need to tell you about something extraordinary that has occurred. While global attention focused on the land war, Ukraine, a nation that effectively had no navy when this conflict began, has achieved one of the most consequential maritime victories in modern history, and it did so using drones costing less than a new car. This is the part that kept me awake last night. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, Ukraine lost almost its entire naval fleet. When the full-scale invasion began in 2022, Ukraine's only major warship, the frigate Hetman Saudashny, had to be deliberately scuttled to avoid capture. Russia's Black Sea Fleet, based in Sevastopol, appeared positioned to dominate the region indefinitely. But here's what almost nobody is discussing. By spring 2024, British Defense Intelligence declared the Russian Black Sea Fleet had become functionally inactive. Not damaged, not degraded, functionally inactive. A fleet that projected Russian power across the Black Sea, threatened Odessa with amphibious assault, and blockaded Ukrainian grain exports, neutralized by a country without a conventional navy. How did this happen? A covert Ukrainian military intelligence unit called Group 13 developed unmanned surface vessels, naval drones, costing roughly $50,000 each. They named their primary weapon the Magura V-5, essentially a suicide boat loaded with explosives. For comparison, the Russian patrol ship Sergei Kotev that Ukrainian naval drones sank in March 2024 was valued at $65 million. The arithmetic is devastating for Russia. Ukraine can build over 1,000 attack drones for the cost of a single Russian warship. And then this happened. The commander of Group 13, speaking anonymously to journalists granted rare access to the unit, described their strategic success. Little by little, we forced the most active and most dangerous part of Russia's Black Sea fleet out of the western Black Sea. Right now, Russians do not keep anything valuable or important in Crimea. Everything is in Novorossiysk. Think about that. Russia seized Crimea partly for its strategic naval importance. The Sevastopol base served as headquarters for the entire Black Sea fleet. Now that base sits largely empty, the fleet having retreated more than 300 kilometers east to Novorossiysk on Russia's mainland coast. And even there, safety is not guaranteed. Ukrainian naval drones have struck Novorossiysk repeatedly. But here is where it gets complicated. Ukraine has not only pushed Russia's navy away, it has fundamentally altered the nature of naval warfare. In late December 2024 and early January 2025, Ukrainian Magura V-5 drones armed with heat-seeking missiles shot down Russian Mi-8 helicopters over the Black Sea. This appears to be the first instance in history where unmanned naval vessels destroyed military aircraft. A $50,000 drone eliminating helicopters Russia deployed specifically to hunt drones. The hunters became the hunted. The innovations continue accelerating. In January 2025, Ukrainian naval drones in the Black Sea launched suicide aerial drones that struck Russian Panzer S-1 air defense systems on land in Kherson region, systems worth $15 to $20 million each. Consider what that represents. Ukraine turned boats into aircraft carriers. Naval platforms launched land attack missions. The conventional boundaries between naval, air, and ground warfare are dissolving in ways planners never predicted. Now, what I'm about to show you changes the whole picture. The strategic consequences extend far beyond naval losses. Russia constructed the Kerch Bridge as a symbol of its permanent claim to Crimea. Putin personally drove a truck across it during the opening ceremony. That bridge is now the primary supply route for Russian forces in Crimea, and it is under constant threat. Ukraine has struck it multiple times using cruise missiles and naval drones, forcing Russia to divert air defense assets to protect it. Every panzer unit guarding the bridge is one unavailable to protect troops elsewhere. The economic implications are equally significant. Ukraine's successful operations shattered the Russian naval blockade that strangled Ukrainian grain exports. Merchant ships now cross the Black Sea carrying Ukrainian wheat to global markets. That trade generates vital foreign currency and demonstrates Ukraine's ability to defend its economic lifelines despite Russian aggression. Wait, it gets worse for Russia. The Shadow Fleet, the aging tankers Russia relies on to evade oil sanctions, must pass through Black Sea waters. Ukrainian intelligence officials have indicated these vessels are now being targeted. Each tanker damaged or sunk represents not just lost cargo, but higher insurance premiums, shipping delays, and crews unwilling to take the risk. Ukraine is using its naval drone dominance to threaten Russia's sanctions evasion strategy. This is the moment that brings everything into focus. General David Petraeus, former CIA director and commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, called Ukraine's strategy sheer brilliance. He stated, "For Ukraine to sink over a third of the Russian Black Sea fleet and force its withdrawal from Sevastopol and the western Black Sea without substantial naval assets is an extraordinary tribute to both the Ukrainian technology sector and the personnel operating these systems." The lesson reaches far beyond this war. Major navies around the world are reassessing their assumptions about maritime power. If a relatively small force using innovative technology can neutralize a traditional fleet, what does that imply for aircraft carrier groups, amphibious assault ships, and the enormous naval investments made for decades? Ukraine is not just fighting Russia, it is showcasing new principles of warfare that will shape military doctrine for generations. So here's where things stand. Moscow airports paralyzed, refineries ablaze, the Black Sea fleet hiding in port, interest rates at 21%, inflation nearing 10%, reliance on China deepening monthly, and drones cheaper than a Toyota breaching defenses worth billions. The question I keep asking is what strategic collapse actually looks like, because I believe we may be watching it unfold in real time.
Here is what strikes me most. The Christmas night strikes did not only damage infrastructure, they shattered something psychological for Russian citizens who believed Putin's assurances that the war would remain distant, that Moscow would stay untouchable. Those hours spent in airport terminals listening to explosions represented a profound betrayal. The social contract, security in exchange for political obedience, has been broken. And the Kremlin understands this. That is why Russian state media has largely stopped reporting on drone attacks in detail. That is why Sobyan's Telegram updates always emphasize interception success, while airport closures and factory fires tell another story. The divide between official narrative and lived reality widens daily, and controlling information becomes impossible when citizens hear explosions from their apartments. But that is not even the central issue. The military-industrial consequences of Ukraine's targeting strategy are devastating. Consider the Efremov rubber plant in Tula. It is not only that production ceased, it is that Russia lacks a domestic substitute. That facility was the sole producer of specific polymers essential for military use. Without those materials, production lines for vehicles, rocket systems, and other equipment encounter bottlenecks that cannot be quickly resolved. The Novoshakhtinsk refinery mirrors this pattern. Before the war, Russia refined enough fuel domestically to supply its military and export surplus for revenue. Ukrainian strikes on refineries throughout 2024 sharply reduced refining capacity. Now, forces in Ukraine face the absurd scenario of a petrostate struggling to fuel its own army. Supply convoys become targets, fuel shortages force operational pauses, attritional warfare favors whoever sustains logistics longest, and Ukraine is methodically eroding Russia's ability to do so. Now, what I'm about to show you changes the whole picture. The strategic dilemma confronting Russian commanders has no favorable solution. If they concentrate air defense assets around Moscow to avoid political humiliation from continued strikes on the capital, frontline units lose protection from Ukrainian drones and missiles. If they prioritize the front lines, Moscow burns. If they defend refineries, factories remain exposed. If they protect factories, refineries ignite. Ukraine has created more high-value targets than Russia can defend. This is asymmetric warfare at its most effective. Ukraine does not need to match Russia's military power. It only needs to impose costs faster than Russia can absorb them. A $50,000 naval drone sinking a $65 million warship, a few $100,000 in attack drones shutting down airports handling millions of passengers, precision strikes on irreplaceable industrial facilities that sanctions prevent from rebuilding. And the international dimension is shifting as well. Russia's display of military weakness, air defenses unable to protect the capital, a navy forced into hiding, an economy dependent on 21% interest rates, erodes its global standing. Countries that purchased Russian weapons are reconsidering. Nations that feared Russian intervention are recalculating. The image of Russian military power that Putin cultivated for 2 decades is collapsing under the weight of Ukrainian innovation. Wait, it gets worse from the Kremlin's perspective. The Christmas night strikes occurred just as diplomatic contacts among Russia, Ukraine, and the United States were intensifying. Putin needs to negotiate from strength, or at least the illusion of strength. Instead, he negotiates while airports shut down, refineries burn, and the fleet hides in port. Each Ukrainian strike demonstrates that time favors Ukraine, that the costs of prolonging war will rise, and that innovation outweighs outweighs mass and tradition. This is the moment that brings everything into focus. Russia faces what strategists call a multi-domain crisis: economic strain from sanctions and inflation, industrial decay from targeted attacks, military losses on land and sea, diplomatic isolation from much of the developed world, demographic decline from casualties, emigration, and falling birth rates. Each factor amplifies the others, producing cascading effects that intensify over time. Russia's options are grim. Escalation risks direct confrontation with NATO. De-escalation acknowledges failure and threatens regime stability. Continued attrition drains resources while Ukraine's capabilities improve. Even a negotiated settlement would require admitting Russia failed to achieve its objectives and accepting whatever security arrangements emerge. So, where does this lead? The honest answer is nobody knows. Wars end unpredictably. Putin may find a formula to claim victory while accepting de facto defeat. Ukraine may lose Western support before Russia collapses. A black swan event could reshape everything. But what the Christmas night attacks demonstrated is that the trajectory favors Ukraine. Time, technology, and strategic adaptation are on Kyiv's side. For Russian citizens sleeping on airport floors, watching factories burn, paying more for everything while their sons die in Ukraine, the question is not whether this war is sustainable. The question is how long their government will pretend it is. I'm curious what you think. Are we genuinely witnessing the opening stages of Russia's strategic collapse? Or is there something I'm overlooking about Moscow's ability to adapt? Share your thoughts in the comments.